Ladies and gentlemen, and I'm glad to be online here. My name is Shannon Rusker, and I'm a Yagara and Turrbal person that descends from the original people of Brisbane City. Very proud of my heritage. The Yagara Turrbal area goes from, Turrbal area I should say, goes from up near the Caboolture area out to Oxley Creek. The Yagara area goes from the southern part of the river and out towards the Great Dividing Range. I have one grandmother that's from the Yagara side, and the great-great-grandfather is from this particular part of the area here, the Turrbal people. His name was Kerr Wally, also known as King Sandy, and he was a good friend of the Petrie family. The Petries, they made friends with him, and he showed them the roads going up north, and main roads and places like that in the early times was carving out the tracks, the old Aboriginal tracks, and most of the roads that you travel on are those ones. The major area group, the language group, Yagara, goes from the Caboolture River south to the Logan River and out to the Great Dividing Range near Warwick and Toowoomba. We're not up on the mountains, we're only at the bottom. But we cover all those areas there and out towards Wynnum as well. And we speak many different languages. They say once upon a time that there was about 80 families that camped along the Brisbane River from the coastal line all the way up inland. I'm also the managing director of Tribal Experiences, and what Tribal Experiences is, it's a cultural company that services events and also education and tourism. So we do tours for groups that fly into Brisbane City, and then we'll pre-package them for them. We also go throughout the schools and more or less pick up a whole cultural centre and drop it in the schools for the kids, and they're able to participate in different activities, boomerang throwing, painting, learn traditional dances, songs, and even a bit of AFL as well. AFL was an Aboriginal game back in the day. I heard they're coming up to Queensland, all of them. I'm going to wrap it up here, but I hope that you enjoy. Today you've got some great panellists here. It's a great honour to be here and involved with the Queensland innovation. I think that we're striving forward a lot, and during COVID time we came up with some great ideas to be able to move forward, not only as people to people and replan that, but also how do we move our companies online as well. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In our language for welcome, we say Yura.
Fantastic, Shannon. Thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time and your welcome. I'd like to add an acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all meeting on today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also, as I always do, to recognise the tens of thousands of years of innovation and entrepreneurship that your people have been involved in and have laid the groundwork for us. Thank you. Thanks so much. So, 5th birthday. We've had a week of celebrating 5 years of Advance Queensland, and today we thought it'd be a good idea to look to the future. So it's wonderful we've got this fabulous past, but what about the future? What's this going to hold for us? How are we going to work with this? And I'm going to do a little bit of a talk up front to get you excited about the future, and then I'm going to hand over and we're going to have this marvellous conversation with this awesome panel that we have here with us. I'm hoping my slides are going to come up at some stage soon, so I can remember what it was I was going to talk about. I think the first thing I was going to say, do I have to press the button for it to go to the first slide? Fabulous. So the first thing I wanted to say is life will never be the same again. I've been saying this for a while, and it's been interesting at the beginning of the year being in Canberra where we had the fires, and we were walking around having trouble breathing, not being able to see very far, our friends and family down at the coast being in extreme danger, and the animal instinct in us said life will never be the same again. And then of course there's been floods, and now we have the COVID-19. So will life ever be the same again? I think probably not. So we are faced with living in this new world. And I would like to acknowledge that there's a lot of people going through a lot of trouble and challenges right now. But I also want to say, on the next slide, that there is really good news too. Now is the time for us to step up and really walk into this new era that can actually deal with these challenges that we face. And the examples I've got here are mostly ones from Queensland. So for instance, I know that mining is a big part of the Queensland economy. If you look at Emerson, it's using drones and big data to go in places where humans can't go so that we can get to these resources that we need to drive our world. If we think about food, V2 food isn't actually in Queensland yet, but we're very, very keen to get them here. This is looking at how do we feed our planet. To actually give everybody access to protein through meat, we need 5 planets. So that's not going to happen in the short term. So we need to do something different about food. What V2 food does is it takes pulses and makes meat out of pulses. They're working in Burger King right now. But the neat thing they also do is they develop new forms of flavor, fats, and all sorts of different bits and pieces you need to make these new foods like the foods that we're used to. So if we want to feed the world, we're going to have to do things differently. In Queensland, agriculture is incredibly important, and we have this amazing capacity here to understand how you do agriculture over vast distances. If we can do it, we can export that as well as the food to the rest of the world. So swarm farm robotics is a great example around Emerald region where they're using robotics to help people be more productive in farms. Then, of course, health. Health is obviously a key issue for us right now, and it's going to continue to be a big issue going forwards. Maxwell Plus, a great example in Queensland using AI to diagnose for prostate cancer. In some cases, more effective than the clinicians. So this is going to be an increasing area for us in health. Of course, we're all really excited about the UQ vaccine. And what's amazing there is how quickly, how rapidly we've been able to adapt and get to the point that we are at now where we're doing the first phase 1 clinical trials. That's unheard of. And you talk to some of the UQ researchers and they're amazed they're being able to do things as quickly as they can. Crises times like now really help us to drive these changes a lot faster. And the last one is there's also the moon and Mars to go to. So Gilmore Space, just last week, they managed to have their jets propelling for 110 seconds, which we believe will get us out to low Earth orbits, which means we can look after those thousands of satellites, which are going to then enable IoT, mass IoT, which will obviously change the world that we live in. So we should be encouraged. There's lots of great things going on. Economies will never be the same again either. Hasn't it been fascinating to watch our companies pivot, to change, to start to deliver PPE, companies that you'd never think would get involved in PPE, who are now doing that. Our whole supply chains are being disrupted. It was fascinating yesterday. I went to the Food Innovation Centre down at Coopers Plains, and they were talking about how we cannot actually export in planes anymore because we can't afford it. It's so expensive, there aren't many of them going. So now we have to change all of our supply chains to work through boats, ships. So there's going to be massive changes for our supply chains. That's just one simple example. The really exciting piece about the changes in the supply chains is that we actually want to have sovereign supply chains. We want to onshore our supply chains and have that manufacturing capability here in Australia. And Queensland is so well set up for this. One thing that drew me here was the amount of manufacturing that goes on here and the potential for advanced manufacturing. So we will have to move into this very rapidly if we are going to onshore our supply chains. But that's exciting. Also, the stats say that 75% of future high-growth jobs need STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. Now, that's a pretty exciting space for someone like myself as a physicist, but it's also a bit shocking, because if you look at the stats that are on the slide, Australia is nowhere to be seen when it comes to how many STEM graduates we have. I've been working in this for 30 years. I'm obviously not doing the right thing because it's not working. We've got to do something differently to encourage young people into STEM so that they can build those future jobs. 65% of them don't exist. How do we explain that to young people? Get into STEM, build the world. That's what's exciting for young people. So on the next slide, please. In all of this, diversity is absolutely key. I swore to myself several years ago, as I got more and more voice, that I would always speak for women in leadership, women in STEM, women in entrepreneurship. So here you go, here's my slide on women. It's not that I don't think that men have a fabulous part to play in this too, but we really need to up the ante in terms of getting that parity for women. Women are well known to be great entrepreneurs and innovators. There was some research done published 2 weeks ago saying that for every woman you have on your board or in leadership, you build your company by 80 million. You know, we're worth it. We're worth investing in. But of course, diversity is much broader than that. And so we need to be making sure that nobody gets left behind in these new economies. Next slide, please. And the urgency is now. I mean, we've been talking these things for, honestly, decades, certainly for the last 5 to 10 years, but the urgency is now. If we look at what's happening in other countries, Israel is the startup nation. They had 20 years of investment, at least, to get to where they got to. Same with Silicon Valley, but we've had that in Queensland too. We've had the smart state, we've had Advance Queensland. We're in a great spot right now to build on that, just like Israel did. In China, I was really shocked about 5 years ago to sit next to someone who was a venture capitalist. I said casually, "So how much money have you got in your fund?" "Oh, 100 billion yuan." At that stage, that was 25 billion Aussie dollars. We had 1 billion in the whole of Australia at that stage. Believe me, China is going for it. India is right now building the largest co-working space in the world. And I won't go into the details now, but they're so well set up to make the most of these new economies. Vietnam launching into Industry 4.0 right from the Prime Minister. I've been at events where the Prime Minister speaks for half an hour, he stays there all morning, and before you know it, it's all out on the media. They are really serious about these new economies. We really need to urgently move rapidly right now. So the new normal, what does that look like? If I'm saying the urgency is now, the other reason for urgency now is all the change and transformation that's going on, and the only way we're going to be able to get through it is with innovation. If we think about the companies have been taking on digital rapidly. The only way that people can now get to market, it's not the only way, but the big way is to get through digital. We're seeing mass uptake of that, mass transformation of industries right now, and also new industries being born. So for instance, CoView is a great example of a telepresence health, suddenly gone from something like 20 customers a week to 20,000 a week. There are some big changes we're seeing in our industry. Government. How is government going to cope with all this? I'm not talking about politics, I'm talking about the public service and service delivery. We will not be able to afford to deliver all the services that are needed. And I tell you what, entrepreneurs are really good at delivering these services. A classic example is Warangaru in Jakarta, Indonesia. A couple of young lads there realized that kids were not getting a good education. They set up an online platform. They've got 13 million students on that platform being educated right now. Another bunch of entrepreneurs in Cambodia doing personalized education for students on iPads without any internet. These things can be done, and really I think entrepreneurs and innovators are the best place to help us with that. And then lastly, how are we going to live? This is a great picture of Zoom and how we're working together. But, how are we going to do that? What is life going to look like? We have no idea. And I would say there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what the future is going to look like, but we do know two things. One thing we know is the only way we're going to cope is to be agile, to be innovative, and to do things differently. And entrepreneurs and innovators are so well placed to do that. The other thing we know is that in Queensland, with all the decades of investment that have been made, we have some amazing assets to build on. But what we need to do is to do that collaboratively, to bring all the pieces together so that we can do so much more together than we do on our own. And the last thing I would like to say is really the most important asset we have is our people. It's you. Those of you who are listening, those of you who are not listening, those of you who will listen later, it's you that is so important, and we all need to come together, work together for Queensland, for Australia, and for the world in this new world that we live in. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn over to the panel. We have a fantastic panel here, some really great people. We chose a wonderfully diverse group because we know that we need diversity, as I said, to meet the challenges that we face going forwards. We have Lisa Siganto. Now, they've given me a short sentence of how I should describe them, so I will read through this. At 20, Lisa says that she escaped Queensland, never to return again because it was so boring. She put that in capital letters. And the shops closed at 12 on Saturdays. But today she's here. She gets a buzz from being part of the thriving ecosystem for innovative social change. So I talked about the fact that governments and services will need to change. Obviously, the work that Lisa does will be really important in that. We have Professor Geraldine Mackenzie, Vice Chancellor at USQ. And Professor Geraldine Mackenzie is, as I said, Vice Chancellor and CEO of the University of Southern Queensland. She says that she is passionate about industry engagement, innovation, regional development, and at the moment, leveraging opportunity in crisis. And we're going to hear more about what that all means. But universities are going to be really key in terms of our transformation and coping with this unknown future. Then we have Jane Hunter. Jane is the CEO of Tritium, a designer and manufacturer of fast DC chargers for electric vehicles. Tritium has about 90% market share in Australia, 20% of the European market, and 15% of the US EV charging market, all here in Queensland. They're headquartered in Brisbane at Murari. Now, forgive me if I pronounce that wrong. I've only been here 6 months. Murari, there you go. Murari, thank you. And have offices in Los Angeles and Amsterdam. Jane was formerly an executive at Boeing, where she was the chief operating officer of the Phantom Works International Division, responsible for designing and building the Loyal Wingman unmanned drone, which is the first new aircraft to be fully built and designed on Australian soil in 50 years. So she'll be representing a couple of areas there, obviously new forms of energy, new forms of transport, but also the corporates and how corporates are going to be involved in this new future. Then we have Cheryl Batchelor, CEO and founder of Yiyapinha, thank you, Indigenous Corporation. She's a proud Kunya woman and is the founder of Yiyapinha Indigenous Corporation, which provides support services to help people to improve their cognitive, social and emotional skills, which in turn improves their ability to sustain employment and achieve an education. So Cheryl has an important piece to play here in terms of obviously diversity, but also in terms of people's well-being and full engagement in these new economies. And then we have Kelvin Ross, Director of the Queensland AI Hub, which is opening for business very soon. This week we're excited about the CEO announcement. Chief Technology Officer at Datawe, is that right? Yeah, thank you. Director of AI Academy, Director of IntelliHQ, and founder and chairman of KJR & Associates Pty Limited. So he's got a few hats there, which will be very useful for us as in our discussion today. But Kelvin's been a serial entrepreneur and a deep technologist for 30 years in Queensland, expanding business and innovation nationally and internationally, and engaging large corporates, government, SMEs, startups, research, and academia. So Kelvin, you get everything when the questions come up. But obviously, deep tech is going to be incredibly important going forwards. So I'm going to sit down, and we're going to start off with a kick-off question, just to get people warmed up. And we're going to be talking about, obviously, the future. I wanted to, when you think about the emerging industries, the new economies, the new future that we're facing, what excites you about this future and what stands in the way? Geraldine, I might throw to you first.
I think it is an incredibly exciting future. Our university is proudly regionally based. We've been in Toowoomba for 54 years now, and Ipswich at Springfield more recently, but these are really high growth, high economic development areas. So in Ipswich local government area, it's going to greatly increase in the next 10, 20 years. It's going to bring jobs and economic growth and prosperity. And as universities in those regional areas, we are anchor institutions. We're deeply embedded and we really are drivers of economic development. So whether it's our research in agricultural technology, in AI or climate science, defence industries, hypersonics, or even space. You mentioned the Moon to Mars project earlier, and one of our collaborators, in fact. There are really exciting things happening in the regions. We're driving innovation, and that's also creating economic, social, and intellectual capital. So what really excites me, it's really about boundless opportunities and growth and meeting the needs of industry and the community, which is what we're really focused on, and collaboration, which I'm going to talk a lot about, I hope, today, because that's really critical here. What stands in our way? I think it's lack of vision, lack of passion, and lack of understanding those needs and not listening to industry. What we've really benefited from all of these things, we've had 1.6 million from Advance Queensland over the past 5 years, over 14 projects, and that's contributed to our very rapid growth and 24 million in external funding now. So you can see the benefits of all of these things coming together.
Right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Geraldine. And it's great that in Queensland we do have universities such as yours in the regions, because you'll be key to, as you say, to transforming those.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Lisa, I might go to you. And Lisa, I forgot to mention that you are Executive Chairman of Impact Queensland. I forgot that up front, so I should have mentioned that. Sorry. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Sarah. What we're seeing is that people are demanding this new economy, and they want to know what this new economy looks like. And this new economy includes like new organisation models, new business models, and a new type of capital to fund them and grow. And that's what Impact Queensland is about. We know that with innovation that we will improve our society, and we're seeing that already. But what we're seeing driving us is actually the millennials and the Gen Zs are telling us that they want to work for purpose organisations. They want to work, but they definitely want to work for for-purpose organisations. And then more people, especially as we've come through COVID, are saying, well, we want meaningful participation in our work and in our society. And also, by the way, we want to know that our super is going to be there for the long term and help look after us, which is the capital part of the equation. And then instead of these traditional, what we've had of government, charities, big business, we're seeing that for-purpose organisations are leading the way. And they've got things in them that include intentionality, empowerment, and they've got the key thing they've got is long-term sustainability. And we're seeing that across the world with the funds, that it's the long-term sustainable organisations that are doing really well through this COVID times. And that's the challenge that we've got of how do we create those long-term sustainable businesses that have purpose and also that are measured on extra value. What's the societal value? What's the well-being value? What are those indexes that we should be measuring? So it's really exciting. People are telling us, this is what we need to do. So that's the opportunity of the future.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lisa. And it is interesting that people are really wanting to move into this. I think COVID is also making people think about their life, their world, and what they want their place to be in it. So that's really interesting. Thank you. Cheryl, I might turn to you. What excites you at the moment, and what are some of the barriers that you see?
I'm actually really excited about the digital therapy space, and that's what we've been doing in Nearly Human, is taking a different view of mental health by looking at it by actually improving the cognitive skills of people using stimulating neuroplasticity through the use of technology. And when you stimulate neuroplasticity, it allows that person to actually be in control of their mental health and practice some skills to actually improve their mental health and therefore engage in education and employment. So I'm really excited about where this is going, because digital therapies are something that we can use in rural, remote communities, but with telehealth to support when therapists are not around. So I think that we in Australia are not really probably taking enough support in this space. In particularly America, they're just going wild. It's actually a big industry about brain health innovation using AI and technology to actually use your body as a means to give you feedback. So in the neuro feedback space, the biofeedback space, the virtual reality space, to help deal with mental health. And I think there's an opportunity there that we can work with our Indigenous communities to look at the mental health and the brain health, because I see them as both being, if not the same, a little bit different. But because I think that brain health is everybody's business, we want to make sure that we don't end up with those horrible diseases later on in life. I think that the concerns that I have about the future is about the digital divide, is that there is not enough really good, robust infrastructure in our Indigenous communities. There's the cost of internet access, the cost of phones. There is an assumption that everyone can afford a smartphone. All these sorts of things can impact telehealth services and allow other support services via apps to be created that support that. So I think in the digital brain health space, we can really take on some innovation there and work with our communities and therapists in a different way, so that when we don't have a therapist around, that we can actually practice some of these mental health skills and practicing saying no using technology to support us. So I'm hoping that today that we can talk and collaborate, and I mean collaborating in the true meaning of collaboration, and that's not just working in silos and working together, but actually a true collaboration and working on community-led projects that can improve everybody's brain health and mental health.
Fabulous. Thank you, Cheryl. And obviously there's a lot of challenge right now with people's mental health because we're going through basically a war. So it is really challenging for people, and it's important that we're looking after people's mental health.
Yes.
And if we are to be productive and creative going forwards, that's going to be incredibly important. Jane, I'm going to hand over to you next. What excites you about what's happening, or what the future brings, and what are the challenges?
Look, I'm a bit of a technology geek, so I guess I'm just incredibly excited about what's to come and what technology is now going to bring to society, to our communities, to individuals, and the benefits that it can bring. And, I work at the conjunction of taking technology and commercialising it and turning it into something usable in the community. And just listening to Cheryl then, isn't it fantastic to think about what's going to be able to happen to health as we use things like machine learning and AI, and that company you mentioned before that's actually able to detect prostate cancer at the levels that they can detect it. So there's going to be these amazing benefits for human health, for renewables and green energy for humanity. And if I look at what's happening in autonomy, automation, AI, machine learning, and I know these are areas that Kelvin also works in, these are going to transform our lives. So as we move towards driverless cars, and we'll have more safety on the roads than we currently have, as we move towards UASs, which are drones that fly themselves, the benefits that they're going to bring when they can fly over vast spaces in the Surat Basin, and you don't have to drive a ute for millions of miles and have the potential to have an accident on rural roads. So there's these massive safety benefits that are going to come with this. And then when you look at the conjunction of those with things like electric vehicles, which will also later be autonomous, you're going to have no pollution on the roads caused by diesel and petrol vehicles as we move away from internal combustion engines. And we can see that there's going to be health benefits for people who live on busy roads and highways. So, I'm just super excited about what the future holds for us as we harness these technologies and, make use of the benefit of them for humanity.
Great, thank you very much. Kelvin, over to you.
I think it's a great follow on exactly what I think you've all been talking to. And I think if you think about the 5 years of AQ and over that 5 years, and the particular area of focus I'm working on is artificial intelligence, but in the last 5 years, you've seen this dramatic change, and it's really proven itself. And it's at that point now where really industry is ready to take the advantages of that. So if you think about the next 5 years of what that's going to look like and what that means for Queensland and Advance Queensland, I think it's really clear now that we're in a global economy, right? We're seeing the impact of COVID and what that's having on us. So it's very clear that's what Queensland needs to do, is think about ourselves in that global economy. And where does a general purpose technology like AI fit into our industries, our Queensland industries, to make it more competitive and position it well globally? What are those, while I think AI will impact nearly every business and influence how it does business in the future, I think it's really important to think about our Queensland industries where we can stand up to be global leaders in that area. And those areas are like healthcare, energy and utilities, our natural resources. Australia is one of the safest places to live in the world, public safety and our supply chain. So we're really thinking about those strategic industries, but we know AI is going to impact a lot of other industries. But then behind that, how do we make sure that we bring the communities along with us? That AI's got that potential to really disrupt jobs, but equally it's going to create a lot of jobs. So I think for all Queenslanders, how do we bring them along that technology shift with us? How do we move them into this new area of economy? How do we educate our workforce and bring them along? I think those are the key things that we want to get on top of.
Kelvin, I'm so glad you brought that up. I think we live in such a unique time. Queensland has invested for decades. We have incredible infrastructure. I know, obviously, the AI hub, we'll have an immersive technology hub. We've got an ag tech hub on its way. We've got the precinct. We've got hubs across all of the regions. We've got fabulous people in the regions who are helping others to build their new businesses. We've got a whole lot of infrastructure around some emerging industries, a lot of investment in research and all the infrastructure that we have there. We've got all those bits and pieces in place. Now we need to bring everything together for all of us to work together to make something of that, including bringing the public along. Because no one's cracked that. No one in Australia has really cracked that. So how do we crack that here so that we can actually have permission to really accelerate? Because the time we have to accelerate is right now. So we're going to hand over to some of these questions that we're now seeing up on the screen. Are you guys going to choose one, or do you want me to just choose one? Or shall I just go from the top?
I can talk about.
Go from the top? Okay, this is from Anne-Marie to the panel. Hello from Ipswich. So glad to have Professor Mackenzie helping lead collaboration in our region, and happy birthday, AQ. That's fabulous. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're thrilled to be 5. Okay, how can we have entrepreneurs linked up with the deep tech research in our universities? Would you like to take that one first, Geraldine, and then I'll...
I think sometimes entrepreneurs can find it difficult to gain entry into a large, complex organisation like a university. We try and make it really easy, and we have some fabulous examples of that. And Gilmore Space is one you spoke about earlier that works with us on our space science program. We actually have our own observatory just outside Toowoomba that we're working with NASA and also the German Space Agency. So we're doing incredible things here in Queensland that people just don't know about. So there are lots of opportunities, and we just want entrepreneurs to reach out to us. We're doing more work on how we can create those opportunities and be more user-friendly. But the regional unis in particular are very user-friendly, and we just ask to reach out to us, and we would love to hear from anybody who wants to talk to us about, we've had examples already in AI and lots of things that we would love to hear from you if you've got those opportunities, and we'd love to know more. So we want to make it as, we really work on it, a very open, we want to hear from you. Rather than closed, please don't come in the door. That was 30 years ago, but it's very different now. So it's a collaboration. We do all of our research in collaboration with industry, almost everything. So that's really what we're about, and most unis are now too.
Fantastic. Thanks, Geraldine. Would others like to add some other experiences that they've had? Jane, I see you nodding your head.
I think, one of the things that I've always been interested in, and I have a lot of academics in the family. My father was a professor. My husband was in, the academic industry. And, of course, I've been in the corporate industry, is that the convergence of the two is just super important. And one of the ways that we'll need to do that in terms of changing the university sector is to actually change the promotional system and the way that we incentivise our academics, because for many years it's all been about publish. You must go to conferences and you must publish an amazing amount of stuff to get ahead in the industry. But actually, if we can incentivise promotionally collaborations with industry, potentially bringing funding into the university, commercialising, then have that as another promotional track, I think we'll see that we actually create that really close collaboration, because we've got to sort of bring the university industry into working hand in hand with industry.
It's as a culture change piece as well as a systems piece. I don't know, you just jump in if you ever want to jump in on any of that, Geraldine.
No, I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah. Lisa.
If it's okay, the next question from David Noble is something that we think about a lot, which is about the entrepreneurs getting into the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which very much involves the universities as well. Are there any plans to coordinate and improve access to the plethora of resources available? It's a really good question, because there are heaps of resources, and it's a balance about the resources and what's missing in the resources, and also the experiential living of, guidance, mentoring, of an entrepreneur who needs the support of the ecosystem. And I'd have to say that there's a lot of not great quality stuff floating around as well. So how do we as Queensland have really high standard resources, the best support possible? And then the gaps, if I could just do a plug, there are two big gaps in the for purpose areas, which is about impact measurement and how we're doing that together, and also investment readiness, that our entrepreneurs do not know that there are specific steps to go through, that they have to go through before anybody will give them capital, and the right capital at the right time. So they're the two sort of things in terms of the resources I'd like to have built. But we as the ecosystem need to support our entrepreneurs in giving them the right things, and not making them sit down and going through sort of workshops that aren't specifically helpful. Like, we need to redesign the whole system.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lisa. I know that we're about to run a workshop where we'll start to look at the journey. We want to do there is a journey map, so AQ does have a journey map. I think it's up on our website, but we're going to update that so it have some information on that. I think events, when we can finally get back into the precinct, that's a great way of meeting people who can help each other. You can't, that's one of the great things to have in this space, as it is in the regions and the spaces we have in the regions. The training, because it's a minefield, go out and get investment is a minefield, and I think we've got some training coming up that we're going to announce quite soon on that too. Cheryl, I just want to, can I get to Kelvin first? Because Kelvin, I saw you've been wanting to talk for a while, so if I can hand it to you.
I've always got something to say, I'm sure. But yeah, I think it follows in, like in the Queensland AI Hub, we see ourselves as a connector. Like, effectively, we almost put that concierge label on it. Yeah. And it's how do we connect these ecosystems? Yeah. And we see universities quite strong, corporates, you know, we've got those large multinational vendors like IBM and Microsoft and Amazon and Google, and then we've got the startups and SME communities, but a lot of times you see them a little bit isolated. So how do we cross them over?
Yeah.
And then also in AI, we know AI's got to be multidisciplinary, right? And the work, and not only that, our government's got a really big part to play. So the work that we're doing in healthcare, it was almost that concierge function with medical AI. How do we navigate and bring these people through the hospital to connect them up with the clinical leaders who are really the champions and will get government to buy into that program? So I think these, you know, the connection elements are really key elements of that.
It's interesting. I mean, something I'd love us to move into. So I like the next phase to be about hyper connectivity. Have people hyper connected, have as much connection across the ecosystem. And for some of them, it's in the horizontals, so AI. Some of it will be in verticals, and some of it will be just anything. So I'd really love to see that. Cheryl, you were wanting to say something.
So I was just going to say that when we're talking about entrepreneurs, we're talking about not just the startup innovators in the IT space and everything, but I think that there's a big space of startup not-for-profits. Being an Indigenous startup not-for-profit, been going for 2 years now, is supporting that space, and that's sort of like a little bit missing with all this collaboration and support as well, especially when you're doing something innovative, as what I'm sort of like doing something different in the mental health space. And I think we need to also get rid of some of the red tape that comes with sort of like setting these up and collaborating. And it's also about that innovation needs to partner with people that are actually working on the ground. And that's one of the things that I'm really mindful of, is that we work on the ground and therefore inform the research and show the impact and measure the impact, like Lisa was saying. Are we investing in, we don't want people doing some of these things that we're talking about innovation, especially in the mental health space, if they're not going to get an outcome from it, and that outcome has been measured and it's, in one sense, researched, like from the university, and peer reviewed, and we don't want people doing things if the effort they're going to put into it is not going to get an outcome.
Yeah, Lisa, you found one?
Just following up on what you said, Cheryl, about not-for-profits, and Danielle Jules posted a question about, she comes from people with purpose. How can we ensure purpose-led businesses become the standard for innovation in Queensland? I really think that is our future. I don't think it's going to be that we're different, and I don't think not-for-profits, social enterprises, great business will be different. We have to be purpose-led, and we really have a fantastic, really fantastic social enterprise ecosystem in Queensland, but we need that to spread to be, purpose-led. That's my vision of the future, and that incorporates, fantastic not-for-profits doing great stuff.
It'll be really interesting to see how our economies evolve. The triple bottom line's been talked about for a long time, but I think probably with COVID it's going to have another little acceleration on that front. So Amrita says, what are some things our government can do better for our education sector given the current landscape? For example, how, in your view, can we fund research and innovation? Goodness. Who would like to tackle that?
I'll start if you like. It's been incredibly difficult at the moment because of the pressure put on us from all different directions. But for us, it's really about working with industry and collaboration. I'll just keep coming back to that because you can't expect finite government funds to fund everything. There are great projects like that get funded, like Advance Queensland is a really good example. I'll keep coming back to that one too, because that gives you money to do a bit of a startup that can then create something much bigger, and it creates that collaboration. So, you can't keep expecting that money to keep flowing in. It's not going to happen, and you have to look at other ways. And what's the point of doing research if it doesn't benefit the community anyway? So it has to be community-led and purpose-led, as we were talking about. And we don't really do that sort of research anymore. It's responding to a need. So we talk a lot about responding to community and industry needs. And if you do that, I think you do solve that problem of how to fund it.
I think, as I said a little while ago, it's interesting times, and it's almost like we are in a war. And in those sorts of circumstances, you have to do a huge amount with not very much. And I suspect that's pretty much where we're heading, and that is one reason why there's mass collaboration.
Absolutely.
Is really, really key. The hyperconnectivity, so people can get straight to what they need when they need it and don't waste time, and then the mass collaboration, so that together we can achieve more. Jane, you were going to jump in on this one too.
Yeah, and actually I completely second what Geraldine was saying, that in these straitened circumstances that we're currently under with government funding, that the collaboration with industry is going to be critical, and in fact co-funding, where you're connecting various people with suitable and similar interests, and then they'll co-fund a chair or a particular role or a particular piece of research within a university. And in fact, our chairman is currently considering a significant amount of funding for a chair, and that would potentially be matched by the Liveris Foundation. And then you're actually going to get a very significant amount of funding for this particular chair, but the research that they'd like done will kind of crack the atom on DC to DC conversion, which is super important for our industry. And so you have this ecosystem where the university sector is helping the industry sector, but the industry is also putting money into the universities. So there's a great symbiotic relationship there.
So what you're talking about there is a win-win. You find these opportunities where everybody wins and everyone can put something in, and sometimes it's not money. It's just resources, people connections, time. Yes, yeah. I'm going to have a couple of plugs. One is the Sustainable Development Goals. So my previous role, we realised that it's, I think it's $2.5 trillion US short of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So government realised that it was not going to be able to do that on its own. It needed to leverage other people's resources in one way or another. So there's experience of doing that. The other one I really want to plug is, and I keep talking about it, is strategic technology road mapping. I'm sure people are sick of hearing it from me, but I think as part of collaboration, we need some sort of a strategy around, well, what are we collaborating about, for what impact, how are we going to measure it, and what are the range of complex issues that need to change. So it's not just about collaboration, it's about regulation, it's around skills building. So that's my little bit of a plug for strategic technology road mapping.
So can I just do a plug about capital? Because we're in a changing time of capital, and we've had sort of expectations of government and philanthropy and research dollars to drive things, but the world is different. Jane's company's just had huge investment from another company, and that's how the capital is going into treating it. But we've now got a whole hybrid of different choices of capital, and we have to use those. And there are all sorts of things emerging. From a government point of view, there's an emergence of payment by outcomes, which is a shift in activity funding, and we need to drive that. What are the outcomes that we can do in all these organisations that give what are the outcomes we can produce that government may pay for? Other things are equity crowdfunding that is raising the interest of the population into something that means something for them, and they want to see ethical companies like here in Queensland, Outland Denim, which is an ethical, anti-slavery, gene-making, environmentally friendly company. The public have financed that. So we need to look at that whole hybrid of possibilities from government, which is less and less funds, and we understand that. So what do we want government to do and to catalyse? What do we want philanthropy to do and catalyse? How do we want research funded? How do we want startup capital? Where's that going to come from? How do we want to use debt? Because it's all really different with such low levels right now. How do we access that debt? And in the end of the day, Queensland, Australia has the huge superannuation funds. So we need to be driving those superannuation funds, saying, we want you to invest in the right things for us. And that unlocking that capital will really change the system, and we're all responsible for it.
Yes. And can we just touch on that point though, because that's so dear to my heart as well, Lisa, which is that we have, a vast amount of money invested in superannuation, and we don't enforce any regulation over what that's invested in. So the superannuation funds have been wedded to shares for forever. They largely invest in the share market. They have some small amounts of other investment. But if we could unlock just a small amount of that and invest it in entrepreneurs, in businesses that might be high risk, and actually turn some of that pension fund money towards investment in this ecosystem, then we're going to unlock this vast amount of funding that we currently really don't have a lot of, and we don't have a huge amount of angel investment or venture capital here in Australia. There's a lot more in the States, so we really need to tap into the super funds.
Yeah, and there are some early movers on that. There's some really great super funds that are doing that, which is fabulous to see. But we probably need to do something which is a paradigm shift to get the others on. So that would be not today, but at some stage that would be a good one to discuss. What's the paradigm shift? How do we actually really move the dial? Not been talking about it for a long time, but how do we actually do that?
Well, as the clients of the super funds, we make those decisions.
Kelvin, you've been
connecting. I think there's the aspect about we've been the beneficiaries of great investment in R&D by successive Queensland governments, I think, over the past 30 years. But I think something we've sort of failed at is that translation and commercialisation of R&D. And investment's part of that. But I also think there's a lot around how do we educate our entrepreneurs about how to do that commercialisation and not just relying on investment. I think how do we actually build a business that generates revenue and demonstrate that value, because if you achieve that, and how do we work with government to be the procurer of that? And part of that is sort of how we manage some of the procurement mechanisms, not trying to make it easy for businesses, but just trying to streamline that our local businesses can really engage those first customers of government as, you know, the stepping stone to global markets.
And Kelvin, that's a really good point, because we know that there's this valley of death with technology where you've developed it and then you're trying to commercialise it, and it gets really, really tough as you try to come up this peak on the other side.
Yep.
And one of the only ways to do that is to actually support people through that. Now, that could be, as you say, through procurement from government, but equally it could be through education. Because one of the areas that I've seen it fail is that you've got a great piece of technology, you've taken it to a company that paid to have it developed. So it could be, a major oil company like Shell, but when they try to introduce it into their business operations, there's another change management piece which they're not ready for. And that's the piece that we actually need to help people with, which is how do you integrate that into your day-to-day operations? When you go to a shop floor supervisor or, a fellow that runs the operations on a mine, and you say, we've got this great idea for you, you're going to be flying drones over the site, and now you've got to fit that into your operations, you'll get a lot of resistance because you haven't done the change management piece.
It's interesting, that change piece, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people did not want to work from home, and then COVID hit, and they're working from home, and now they want to stay working at home. People we're always a little bit reticent about change. I'm not. I love change, but I know a lot of people are. And that absorptive capacity, building that absorptive capacity in companies and in government. The way I would love us to become is to have this semi-permeable membrane, all of us heading together to the same goal, but not to think of its government and its industry and it's blah, 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 but that we're all together. Anyway, let's get through some more of these questions. How do we create a range of sub-ecosystems? For example, we would love and really benefit from a mixed reality creative industry area. We would love to connect up with other startups and other aspects. You need business investors and other interested in this. So I guess, Kelvin, that's what you're doing with the AI Hub, isn't it?
That's one example, and I think we've got the XR sort of community starting up and the robotics community, and these all connect in some ways as well. There's a lot of discussion between us and them. We also then think about, well, what are those industry verticals and what's the alignment through our industry associations we need there, whether it's manufacturing or the defence industry and so on. So you've got to create those connections, right? Again, the sitting in silos is the problem. So how do we make those crossovers?
No, it's a fantastic point, and we need to facilitate those because you don't know what you need until you hear about it. And so when you suddenly meet some of these amazing companies and entrepreneurs, your ears will prick up and you'll go, actually, that's a piece of technology that such and such could use. So forging those connections is really critical.
Okay. Oh, I like this one. Monica, good on you, Monica. Together we've built a remarkable collaborative culture in Queensland. What does success look like for next AQ? What would you like, you as the community, like success to look like? Cheryl, go.
I would love success to look like that everybody is working in collaboration, in true collaboration within the definition of collaboration, not just getting silos together, and actually measuring impact, like Lisa was saying. So as I said before, so that we're getting outcomes that are measurable and people's improvement in their quality of life. So I suppose the success looks like for me is improvement in quality of life for everyone.
Any others, Scott?
I mean, look, I would say two things with AQ, and we've been the beneficiary of co-funded projects at Boeing with AQ, which is co-funding's a brilliant idea because where it favours both the government and it favours industry, you'll bring in additional funds, which are actually often foreign investment funds, which are really hard to attract to Australia, and you can attract them into Australia by co-funding, which is something that government can do, and I think that's a really exciting area for AQ to leverage. And the other one, which is not always so popular but actually works on a practical level, is enforcing the connection of small and large industry. So one of the things AQ did with Boeing was they co-funded a significant project to develop a mission system for a drone. But one of the features of that funding was that I think it was up to 40 SMEs had to be engaged, and 40% of the funding had to be spent on Queensland SMEs. And so then you actually enforce bringing small to medium enterprise in Queensland into the supply chain of a global corporation. And that's a great way to help them be successful because it helps them scale up, it helps improve their quality, it gives them a customer that they can work with in the future, and it gets them in the door in a way that would be very hard for them to get in the door otherwise.
A classic example of multiple outcomes, one piece of resource, money, people, and multiple outcomes.
Absolutely.
The one about attracting overseas investment is interesting. So Main Sequence Ventures has been really interesting to watch how we've been working with others. So we very much co-invest, and just recently we've had a lot of co-investment from overseas. People are really attracted to Australia and the investment opportunities here. We just got to show them Queensland's got these great opportunities too.
Yeah.
Kelvin.
I think, great point about our communities, because I think our number one goals are to grow economic growth, creating investment and business and so on. And we think from that jobs will flow, which is a very important metric. But at the same time, if we don't address some of the diversity metrics, and it means we're going to leave, particular communities behind, and they'll become really digitally disconnected from the world. So if we don't measure that impact, and particularly not just our Indigenous communities, but gender is massive in AI, because there's such a big gender gap in AI. It's literally like 10% 10% female participation, and really that's an unhealthy industry to grow and continue.
And then along with that, our Indigenous businesses are not represented very much in this space.
Yeah.
And I sort of would like to do a plug there that I would hope that the success is that we will have a lot more Indigenous businesses being very successful in Queensland, and not just doing their traditional business type things, that they're actually being innovative and helping our communities and helping Queensland sort of build up and do wonderful things, if not in the technology space, in other spaces, in your area. So I think that we need to come back and support Indigenous businesses in different ways, not just in the traditional ways that we're doing them.
And interesting, that has an impact economically and socially.
Yes, absolutely.
And the economics, if you don't have diversity, you're missing out on a whole load of economy that you can be growing. New companies, new ideas that diversity spawns.
And Sarah, I think on top of diversity, which is so critical, and it's actually super critical just for innovation to be successful, you must have diversity of gender, of ethnicity, of so many different things. But behind diversity, where we had moved to, is it's not enough to have diversity, you must have inclusion. So you can bring in 25% women into STEM, but if you're not inclusive, and it's the same goes with Indigenous, if you're bringing Indigenous people into your business and helping support them and making them feel included, then they'll stay. But if you don't have inclusion as well as diversity, then you won't be successful. And that was something we realised after kicking off a diversity initiative, that we started to get the numbers up, but the retention wasn't there. So then we actually had to move into inclusion, which is making sure that people feel included and are treated in equitable ways.
I think there's some great goals to have. I think something we haven't touched on yet is how society is going to change. So if we do leave people behind, we'll have social unrest, and then goodness knows what our society is going to look like. So it's all real for us as techies and innovators and entrepreneurs to get excited about the future, but there's some key bits around being human that we need to remember as well.
I don't think it should be separated at all. I think it's implicit, and like what Geraldine was saying, we're doing things, for the good, and that's what we'll be furthering. So as we, all our business models, everything else, as we change how we address societal problems, it's really implicit in everything we're talking about. better transport, better energy, using things remotely. So it shouldn't be sort of an either or. And I think, you know, we often think, oh, not-for-profits and looking after the people, and, you know, that is, you know, the core of the future innovation, because we're going to be looking after everybody. And fantastic stuff about what you've just been sort of saying, especially diversity, inclusion, remote. I think one of the things for AQ in 5 years' time is how have we distributed the organisations that we have in Queensland, you know, where are they? And like, we want them, you know, in the Cape, we want them in outback Queensland, and we don't want any restrictions for that, and there shouldn't be. And we've learnt from COVID that we can do stuff, you know, very simply. So we don't want to lose that.
And I think if you also address it in a positive way, like if you think, you know, Queensland's such a vast state, right? And I used to go and give talks in London and say, we're working with a customer that's literally in Moscow, and then the European, holy dooly, you know, like that distance, you know, like here to Cairns or something like that. But actually, if we focus on that and address it, it actually gives us natural, like Brisbane's like the world leader in remotely operated vehicles for the mining industry, which is now going into space, right? And I think if we addressed issues in our Indigenous remote communities, you know, there's need for that around the world, right, in other communities. So I think if you reflect on it in a positive way and really look at innovative solutions, it actually opens up a lot of global
Well, one of the
opportunities.
things that really excites me, and I know people, you know, think that I'm talking about flying to Mars, which I probably am, but we do know that there will be flying cars and flying taxis. That is upcoming. And when we do that, we're actually going to open up the ability for people to live in remote communities, for people to live wherever they'd like, and to still work in the city. And so suddenly we're going to enliven our remote communities by having people who are in all walks of life who can work from home,
And
who
I think
don't need to be working in a big
COVID's a catalyst
city.
for that,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah. It's going to be fantastic for rural communities.
And that's where
it's going to re-energise.
Yeah, the hubs that we've been working on with various people for a number of years in the regions is really important. Geraldine, do you want to talk about what you think success might look like for AQ? Anything from your sector that you'd like to see?
I just wanted to pick up on one of the questions asked, which was about bringing the arts into STEM. And I think that comes back to some of the diversity issues that we've already discussed, because there's no such thing as a discipline-specific research problem.
Yes.
And we're learning now to bring in lots of different disciplines and industry into solve these wicked problems of our time, rather than sending a researcher off to sit in a room or a lab for a long time and come out with a theoretical answer. It's just so different now. So AQ, I think, brings people together in a really great way, and the future is going to be about that shared vision, and the shared vision has to be about collaboration and concentrating on solving a very real problem rather than a theoretical one.
And Geraldine, I so second that, and I saw that question about what are we leaving behind the arts and humanities in favour of STEM, and they're a balancing act. They're both incredibly critical, and if we just focus on STEM and we give away the arts and humanities, we're going to have lost that diversity. And I see brilliant examples of it being successful through industry right here in Queensland. In fact, I'm probably a good example. I have an arts law degree, and I have worked in technology all of my career, in whether it's IT or AI or machine learning. The new CEO of Arrow Energy is a woman with a law degree. She's from an arts background, but she's in a highly technical industry, and you bring that diversity of thought. So you think slightly differently from the engineers, and that rub point is where innovation occurs. So I'm a big supporter of what you're saying.
Sarah, that's so true. I'm a lawyer too, and my research isn't anything but. So I'm another example again.
Yeah, look, I think it's a classic example where tech thinks it develops tech and then it gets it out to market, and that's the end of the story. But actually, there's so much for the humanities that needs to go into it.
Human factors. If you don't do the human factors engineering, then
I'd actually love to see our researchers doing design thinking right up front when they do their research. You know, they lay out what research they want to do and think about their customers. A classic example I really like. This is an old example, but a bunch of male engineers went out to Africa to help this tribe because they couldn't get their water. The women had to walk all the way down this big hill to get to the river, get the water, bring it up the top. And they thought, oh gosh, poor women, that's terrible. So they went, of course, they spoke to the men because the men were leading the tribe. So they spoke to the men. The men said, oh, our women, it's just so awful. They've got to do this big walk down there and back up. Oh, we'd love to have a pump up here at the top of the hill. So the engineers built the pump, went back a year later, no one had ever used the pump, no one had touched it. Turns out they thought, oh, maybe we should talk to the women. So they talked to the women said, yeah, look, we love going down the hill. That's the time we get away from the men and we party and dance and we talk, and we didn't want the pump, you know. So a classic example of not employing the humanities in with the science. Okay, organisations are often tempted to outsource tech roles and capability to offshore service providers or large international players. What are some of the ways to tempt them to invest more in growing local talent? I tell you what, I saw this a lot in India. So obviously people have been offshoring to India for a lot of their talent, and there are hundreds of multinationals in India. They've got bases there to connect with this backroom support they can have. And now, of course, India is in this incredible situation where they've got an educated population. They've got more STEM graduates than the US has graduates. So they've got these really key tech people over there, and they've now got the multinationals. They are so well set up to get to global routes to market and build new industries. So we need to be able to do that too. So over to you, panel. What would you do to solve that one, attracting the...
Well, one thing we do need to do is fill in the missing skills gaps because you have to go overseas for some skills. And so if we can work with the university sector on some niche roles that are going to need to be educated here in Australia, so that we have those degrees, because we let some degrees die. It's very, very difficult now to get manufacturing and industrial engineers. It's impossible to get harness engineers. They all come out of the Americas, out of Mexico. Power electronics seems to have disappeared in Australia, and so those are really hard to get. We've had an ad out for a year for a power electronics engineer. We don't get any. We have to import them generally. If we do get them, we just hang on to them like hen's teeth. So there's a number of skills areas that we need to look at filling, and particularly you mentioned before, Sarah, about onshoring a lot of the manufacturing, bringing back in technology areas like PCBAs. We don't have the skills for a lot of those anymore. We gave them up when we gave up manufacturing. So if we want to manufacture, we've got to bring those back.
Yeah, I think that skills piece is a really fascinating topic, which we could probably take a whole panel session on. But I'd like to put a plug in for the TAFE as well, because I think it's not just about the higher ed, it's TAFE too. And I think there's a number of skills in current industries that just need a little bit of tweaking to be able to work in the future and emerging industries too. So it's not such a big change as maybe some think. But I'll hand over to maybe Geraldine, if you want to add something around this skills piece and attracting, making sure we're building tech skills here in Australia.
No, I think we covered it really well, because we've got the challenge at the moment. We're not bringing our international students in. This semester's pretty much out, and this is our big international semester. We've got to think really differently about it. So my university's major country, the students that come to us are from India. They come to us in engineering, IT, some in business. They're great students for all the reasons you just said. How can we better deliver to India offshore? At the moment, that's really not a consideration for cultural and other reasons. But we've got to be breaking down these barriers, because they need some of the extra educational skills that we can provide. If we can't get the students here, how can we better work with those countries? Because our other big country is Nepal, for example. And they really need the training that we're able to provide. So how can we break down those international barriers? Because if we don't do that, we're heading for absolute disaster in the next couple of years, and we know that.
Yeah. Thank you. Kelvin, you had something.
Yeah, look, having done a higher degree, I think you train yourself in how to self-educate, and it's almost that lifelong learning requirement, I think, is mandatory now. And when we're giving a talk around the Young Women Leaders in AI program to a breakfast on Mother's Day to mums and their daughters, and you're sort of thinking, it's not the school kids I'm worried about, it's actually the middle-aged parents.
Exactly.
And it's that transition of their skill set, I think. And I think this is we're really starting to see now that as our next generation is going to live to 100, they're going to be working for 50 years, and they're probably going to go through multiple career changes through that time.
5 by the time you're 40, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and so it's going to be those multiple gap years they have to re-educate and realign. And what is a nurse going to learn about how AI is going to change their job? What's a national parks officer going to use? and understand technology in how that's embedded in how they manage the environment. I
And
think these are the...
How do we do more of what they've done with, say, the Dip Ed, where if you have a base degree, you can come and do 1 year of study and then you can be a teacher? How do we do that with, say, coding? So if you've got an engineering degree, a science degree, an ICT degree, why can't you do a 6 to 12 month course, which then, you know, makes you qualified to go and be a C++
That's right.
developer?
And we've got the engineering, but micro-credentialing in tech is like growing massively, right? In terms of going and getting your AWS certification or your networking certification.
So Cheryl, I'm going to throw to you. I'm going to throw you in the deep end here on this one. How do we draw people into that? Because we can provide all of these, from a diversity perspective, we can provide all these skills and tools, but how do we draw people into that to see it as a possibility?
I think there's a couple of things there. One is my background's in education. So as we were just talking then, my mind was boiling off those when I was a high school teacher and I was a guidance officer and career counsellor, thinking of those sorts of, things. And I think this goes back to, grade 2 children now are going to be employed in an industry that's probably not even created yet. So what can we do in the school system? I mean, at the moment, we're just completely hammered with COVID, and I'm concerned about our children's future at the moment that are going through schooling at the moment. But I sort of think about our curriculum and think about, well, how do we talk about these things? How do we talk about innovation? In business education, where I was a head of department, we did talk about innovation and enterprise. We actually called it enterprise back then, a business enterprise, and we did little business things, but we really weren't innovative. We were just doing what's already out there. So I think there's some space in the curriculum that we can probably tweak a bit in regards to getting kids ready. But I'm also concerned about that what we're talking about is at a really high level. And I'm wondering if there's a gap in between, and you mentioned TAFE before, is there sort of like stepping stones? Because, our children and coming through teenagers, they don't want to go to university. They've seen the other people out there that go through university and come out multi-millionaires. So university might not be the best track, and there might be different ways. And I think as education, we sort of need to think about that we want them to get there, but what are these sort of ways to get there? In the Indigenous community, it's a little bit different. We need to solve problems. We need to ask the communities what their problems are and be community-led about that. And we can sort of say, look, these are some solutions that are possible within that, and can we help you, solve that using your people and building capacity within that. We also have to think about our brain health along this way, is that if you don't have the cognitive skills and the social skills, because those two things need to come together, if you don't have those really strong and working with people, this is going to fall over. So you can have a really great CEO coming along and got the best mind, but their social skills are a little bit lacking. So there's a space there for that. So I hope that answered that question.
No, that's a great answer. And I think what we're hearing is actually it takes a lot of us and a lot of different parts of the ecosystem as part of the education. So obviously universities are absolutely key, and the way that you're changing and transforming the way that you educate is key.
It is about stepping stones, and a couple of people mentioned micro-credentialing. We've just done a big push out on micro-credentialing. We've had thousands of applications. We offered one free this semester because of COVID. Over 2,000 applications, and people are going on and they can stack them up into a subject and then stack them up into a graduate certificate and keep stacking, and that's what people want to do. And the other thing, we've offered 20 6-month programs that the government introduced because of COVID, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of applications. So these have been our two big success stories this semester, because they're small chunks that you can come and do. You might not have been to uni before. You can come and do something that introduces you to engineering or to something in the arts, and that's what people want to do now. So it's a very different sort of learning experience, and that's what we need going forward in this post-COVID period.
Yeah, and as you say, the stepping stones and the different people who are involved. So for instance, the AI Hub, that'll be an educator as well. There'll be things that we'll be doing there.
Yeah.
There'll be events here where there'll be education of various sorts. I think there's a whole load of us that need to work together. Corporates who have been really excited. I think it was BHP who are doing a piece around the new skills for mining and engineering, and they're doing it very collaboratively. It's really great to see. Now, I think we've probably got time for one more question, and then I'm going to throw to you for the rallying call. So let's go for, let me see. Happy to let one of you choose or rather than me.
Well, can I choose about the impact of disruptive technology on jobs for youth? Because I think it's a huge concern for everybody in the country. And I think what we just heard about micro-credentialing is a really helpful part of like getting skills for other jobs. But here we've got huge opportunities in things like AI that have never been there before. And it's not only, it's also the people who are disadvantaged, who find it very difficult to get a job. It's those. So I would have thought at the end of 5 years of AQ, we've actually come up with something like some different social solutions, including guaranteed jobs. And how do we do that? Because there's all these opportunities now of new work coming into Queensland with the borders, unfortunately, having the borders, but we're going to have borders. So what does that mean? You know, what can we replace import-wise, people-wise? What can we do here that we're learning from? And I think it's amazing how we've flipped so well through COVID, you know, in education, schools doing, you know, everything online instantly, the telehealth, you know, we can do it. How do we push this along? And I think jobs focus for the youth is actually number one priority, but it's not a sympathy vote. It's this, we can do it.
I think that's an interesting point you make about the borders and the fact that we can't have sort of new people coming into the system. We've actually got to convert, if you like, the people we've got in the system now to give them what they need to take part in this.
Well, I know from young people, my children's age, and my oldest two, who are sort of 21 and 18, that's their biggest concern for all of them and their peers, is that the impact of COVID and that impact on the jobs market is going to disproportionately impact them as young people because they have no experience in the workplace. So how do they get that foot in the workplace when there's so few doors open? And the competition's now incredibly stiff for them, even coming out of university, to get an internship, to get that first job. So we really do have to worry about our young people and work out how are we going to get them into employment and not have such a large gap between, for example, university or school and their first job that they can never get back in. So once they have a gap of 4 to 5 years, it gets incredibly hard to get into the workplace at all.
Yes, yeah. And I wonder if we'll move to a universal basic income. You know, right now having to support people because they don't have jobs. I wonder if that'll be a bit of an impetus for us to move into that.
But I also think it's not just the education. We've got to create those entry jobs because unless someone finishes school or they finish university, they've got to get that first job, you know, and you've got to get them into that traineeship role. After they've got 2 years experience, almost the education, the accreditation's almost irrelevant to them getting the next job because they've got that experience. It's great they've got the education background to support that. And we've got the same issue as people change roles. So like the teams that we form bring in people from other disciplines, whether it's a nurse or a graphic designer, and then them actually seeing, I didn't believe I had a fit in this technology space, but they find rapidly they do. But how do we create those paid employment roles for them initially? I think that's the stuff I'm always working on, going, I've got to get investment so I can create those initial jobs for those people.
And there's a gap between rich and poor because we know we're seeing a lot of research showing that unpaid internships can't be afforded by all people. So not many people can do a 3-month summer break where they don't earn any money. That's the privilege of people whose parents are still paying for them and looking after them. So how do we look after those disenfranchised students who cannot afford to do those unpaid internships to get their foot in the door with a company?
I think this is a topic that we should probably talk about for a long time, and we need to seriously think about what we do about it. Not right here, right now, but we do need to. So in our last few minutes, we agreed as a panel that we'd have a rally call at the end of this. So everyone on the panel is going to call you to some sort of action. So I'm going to hand out to the panel. Who is going to go first?
I'll go first. Yeah, look, we're definitely building out an action plan with the AI Hub around some of these issues we've talked about, and definitely front of mind. And I think as we find, you know, how we fund projects, in the back of our mind is job and skills creation behind that, and that's something important to me about that. And part of why I do a lot of pro bono work is really that next generation. You know, I've been the beneficiary of a great education here in Queensland, and, you know, managed to be successful in business. But thinking almost about, you know, my own kids coming up and other kids in the community, it's such a great place to live. How do we make this the best place in the world to live? So that's my next point.
Yeah. So your rally cry is, how do you draw the kids into the next?
Let's
economy?
create those opportunities for the
Yeah.
next generation. Yeah.
Great. Okay, Jane, you next.
Oh, look, I have to put in a rallying cry for I must attract more women into STEM. We've got terribly low levels of women in STEM. And I really just want to, talk to young women coming up and in fact mature women who are restudying to consider that there are some amazing jobs in STEM. There really are some amazing opportunities, and to think about that as a career. And to look to women who are in there as role models and to understand where that can take them. So I really, really want to encourage both young women into STEM, and I also want to encourage our Indigenous kids into STEM, because there's some fabulous career opportunities for them in STEM. So, and the other thing is, for senior leaders, I really want them to think about diversity and inclusion as really critical to them in their leadership roles, that they can role model that for others, and that if they can set a tone within their organisation of both diversity and inclusion, it will actually have a huge positive impact on their business, on their financial bottom line, but also that the rub-pointed innovation occurs not from groupthink, but from people who bring different schools of thought. So diversity and inclusion is really important to business.
Great. So I think the rally cry to everybody on the call is to make sure we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, and we should collaborate and collectively do as much as we possibly can to make sure no one is left behind. Thanks, Jane. Cheryl, what's your rally cry?
Well, I've got a few things. I think what I'd like to say is getting more Indigenous businesses, growing that particular space so that we can support our communities to grow, and that could be using technology. I think there's a space there. One of my concerns is if the kids in Kalamala, they don't work when they're 14.9 months because there's no opportunities for them to get part-time work while at school. And I think there's a technology space that can happen. And we're talking about youth and sort of like bringing them forward with that. I think there's a space there in innovation that's a gap that needs to be filled, especially with our young people. I think the digital therapy space, I think with all we're talking about, we really need to be mindful of everybody's brain health and their mental health, because COVID and all these innovations creates another layer of stress that we're not really sort of like coming up with innovation in that space. And America and Israel is so far ahead of us in the brain health space in regards to digital therapies. I think there's something innovative there that we can do, not only in our Indigenous communities, but for all of us. And so that our psychologists themselves and our psychiatrists and all our mental health support workers don't get burnt out like our nurses are. So there's a space there that we can certainly be innovative about. But I just want to layer on there that means community-led rather than an innovator coming up with an idea and then trying to sell it. So it's about working in collaboration, and within collaboration, I mean not just having silos coming together, but true collaboration, so that we're coming up with community impact and that we can measure those outcomes in our community and also in our businesses.
So thanks, Cheryl. A few rally cries there. One is pathways for youth into business and jobs. The other one is to look after our mental health and look after each other too, I think. Yes. And then the other one is to make sure that we are having impact in our communities. Lisa, over to you. Rally cry.
Rally cry. Watch where the money is. Watch how you spend your own money on your own products and services and what you're helping to support and innovate. Look at where your money's invested in super and how that's being spent. Really look closely, because each individual has power of that. Facilitate and contribute and participate in new ways of funding, like the equity crowdfunding. $400 gets you become a shareholder and you get to decide how businesses operate. And then quite differently, just on the jobs and the innovation, look for the fantastic opportunities that are available for example, people who are on the Asperger's spectrum, who can go now and work in drone work, artificial intelligence work. There's lots of opportunities, and I'm happy to facilitate that.
Fantastic. So lots of opportunity, and watch your money. Geraldine.
Be optimistic in our potential. There's incredible potential in Queensland. So whether it's defence industries at Ipswich using future materials, whether it's space industries at Toowoomba using technology developed in astronomy for fire detection, I think we should invest and position for the future and build resilience, particularly at this time, and focus on what really matters, which is reacting to community, business and industry needs, and that's through collaboration and innovation.
Geraldine, what a fantastic way to end the panel. Optimism. Let's focus on optimism and all the opportunities of the future. So I know you're not here in the room, but there's over 200 of you on the call this morning. I hope you can feel really proud of yourselves. Thank you so much for being part of it. Some across Queensland, some outside of Queensland, and some outside of Australia. So thank you so much for being part of this. I'd like you to join me in thanking the panel for their involvement today. Now, obviously we won't hear you clapping, but please do clap, and I'm going to clap. I'd also like to thank Jackie and all of the team here today that have made this so seamless and smooth, and I'm sure it's worked very well for you. Apologies we didn't get to all of your questions, but I hope you found this a stimulating conversation. I hope you're as excited as we are about the future, and keep in mind that we want this hyper-connectivity. This is not up to government, this is not up to the corporates, it's not up to the universities, it's not up to the VC, it's actually up to all of us. So how do we all have this hyper-connectivity and this mass collaboration so we can build on the fabulous things that you've been doing for the last several decades here in Queensland to take us to the moon, Mars, beyond, but also to make sure that we're looking after our community and drawing everybody along with us. Thanks so much for your time, and look forward to the next 5 years working with you. Cheers.